All right, everybody, it's time for the biggie. Chapter 3. This is a tough chapter, so you've got to follow along as we go through the whole thing. And it surprises a lot of students because it's pretty medical. So we're going to get into nervous system, brain, endocrine system, how the brain functions within the nervous system, what's guided as far as the communication systems within the body. So I'm going to start off with this slide here, and this should be easy points. Look for this question on tests from now on. Psychology is the study of what three things? Those three things are neuroscience, mental processes, and behavior. And why we want to stress this right now is a lot of folks hear the term psychology and they think more in terms of chapter 14 and chapter 7, social psychology, mental processes like memory and cognition, those kinds of things. But if you think about it, all of that is determined by our biological makeup, the genetics within us, what's going on in the communication systems within ourselves. If you remember when we were talking about motivation and stress, we talked about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, how we respond to certain stresses and how we calm down when those stresses aren't posing dangers anymore. So this particular chapter gets into neuroscience, so we look at the nervous system as well as the brain. And then biopsychology is the combination of neuroscience and psychology. How does biology, the environment, behavior, how do those things combine and interact? That's what we're really looking at in this chapter, and it's an important chapter because it determines a lot of psychology study later on. When there is a disorder, for instance, what's causing that disorder? Is there a disruption in the neural system? What's happening there? All right, so the two main communication systems of the body are the nervous system and the endocrine system. And they're going to use chemical messengers in different ways in order to send communication throughout the body. So we're going to get into the nervous system first, and we're going to look at the foundations of the nervous system and start looking at neurons. There's some pictures of some neurons there. We might talk more about those in class, but let's look at the basic types of neurons. So first of all is the sensory neuron. These neurons are going to carry messages from sensory receptors toward the central nervous system. Now, the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so I've got a desk right here. When I touch the desk, it's sensory neurons that are feeling the tactile response, that hardness of the desk. And those sensory neurons are sending messages back up to my brain and spinal cord saying, yes, that desk is pretty tough. You probably don't want to hit that desk very hard. Okay? Motor neurons are going to take messages from the central nervous system towards the muscles and the glands. So let's say that this desk was in my way and I needed to move it over a little bit. Well, it's motor neurons from my brain and spinal cord going out to the peripheral nervous system, which we'll talk about later, into the peripheries, into the muscles, saying, okay, move that desk a little bit to get it out of the way. Okay? Easy mnemonic device to remember these, because here's the deal. Sensory neurons are also called afferent neurons, and motor neurons are called efferent neurons. So an easy way to remember it is the acronym SAME. Sensory, afferent, motor, efferent. The word SAME is a nice little mnemonic device to remember those. Interneurons are going to carry messages between nerve cells, sometimes within brain and spinal cord, sometimes it'll bypass the brain. So think of in terms of reflexes. Let's say that instead of a desk, this was an oven and it was turned on, and I put my hand on the oven, and obviously it's an oven that's hot. I pull my hand away really quick. Well, the interneurons are what allow us to have reflexes like that. And they'll bypass certain parts of the communication system so that the action happens more rapidly. Okay, so those are interneurons. All right, here's the structure of a neuron, and this is going to take most of the rest of my recording here. So I'm going to use a power cord, or a couple of power cords, as examples here. And because you're going to need to know what a neuron, what all the different structures of the neuron and what those different structures do. Okay, now it's not a perfect example, but it's pretty darn good. Okay, so if this is my neuron here, my extension cord, the nucleus is going to be this head here. Okay, and the dendrites are going to be the receiving end, so the prongs. And the dendrites are going to receive an electrical impulse. So if I were to plug this into an outlet, the dendrites, the prongs, are going to receive that initial impulse. Okay? Now, this is one of the reasons it's not a perfect example, is because I can't see into the plug, but the nucleus, and most of you have studied cells enough that you know that the nucleus is kind of the command center. The soma is the cell body, so it would be like the plug here. And then all the stuff that's kind of, it's like a jelly type of substance, it's the cytoplasm, it's all around the nucleus. Okay? In an extension cord, obviously there's this black coating around it. Inside that black coating is how the electrical impulse actually travels down the extension cord. So the copper wiring that's in the extension cord, that's the axon of a neuron. Okay, it's going to carry the message. Mr. Woodard on the next video will tell you how it does that. Okay, so it's the copper wire inside the electrical cord. Now, again, not a perfect representation of a neuron because the nodes of round VA are actually little divots. We don't have the divots in the extension cord, but you can imagine if I took a little knife and just kind of cut little divots in here, that would be the nodes of round VA. The black piece here is the myelin sheath. That's incredibly important. If I don't have a myelin sheath, then the communication, those electrical impulses going down the copper wiring, those can go all in different places. So they're kind of harnessed with the myelin sheath. This insulates the axon. That's going to be really important for diseases like multiple sclerosis, where you have a degeneration of the myelin sheath. Okay, so the electrical impulse would travel all the way down to the other end of the extension cord here. And on this end, you would get your terminal buttons. Again, not a perfect representation, but they would kind of branch out and there would be their terminal buttons. And then I have another neuron here. Those terminal buttons are going to send that electrical impulse into my next neuron here, and they're going to talk to each other so that when I plug them in, if I can here, I plug it in, and now all of a sudden the electrical impulse, that's not a perfect plug for this one, but anyway, you get the point. Once they plug in, the electrical impulse from the black extension cord then goes into the next extension cord, and I can hook up my Christmas lights or whatever. Now, cool thing about a neuron and their communication system is you don't actually plug them in. They're actually just super close together. And there's a little gap between the two neurons. That little gap is your synapse. And that's where the chemical messenger is going to cross the synapse, and it's going to function like plugging in two extension cords. There's just a gap there, and instead of plugging it in, that gap functions as the area where the communication, the message, is transmitted from one extension cord to another, one neuron to another. Okay, so that's basic structure of a neuron. I'll leave it at that, and Mr. Woodard will pick up the function and how that impulse actually travels in the next video.